Hello, my name is John Barley. We are actually introducing, as our first inaugural presentation of our news presentation, a guest speaker, and our guest speaker is Steve Keall of Keall Barristers.
That's me, hello.
Great. So thank you, Steve, for coming in and wanting to explain to us all about cybercrime and looking at it from a legal perspective,
That's
which is really, really important for the business community. I've actually done a little bit of homework, and it surprises me that the word cyber is actually Latin, and it comes from the world of control and systems. And so therefore, from my understanding of cybercrime and putting it into plain English, it's really the ability of an outside third party to gain access and to damage that system and control from an outside source. So what are your comments to that?
Well, I think that's a fair enough starting definition, John. One of the key issues with businesses today that are quite reliant on information technology is a potential attack or penetration by an outside force. And I think it's interesting the way that you've studied the derivation of the word. Actually, I dare say that's what it comes from. And I seem to remember that it's influenced by the way that term is used in a novel as well, though I can't quite put my finger on what that was right now. But maybe if I remember later, we can put a link below this video. So we have the outside forces on the one hand, but also something that is possibly overlooked, and something I think that you and I have discussed when we were chatting about this before, is the potential for inside forces to have an effect. And I actually have a bit of a personal take on this. That really it's the internal risk that businesses often have to look at. And what we've seen internationally in the last couple of years in terms of these basically IT meltdowns is cases involving a disgruntled employee or someone, the receptionist for example, or someone receiving a call and basically giving out information that permits a third party to then attack the system. For myself, I'm a prolific user of Dropbox, Microsoft 365, Evernote. This is not an endorsement, particularly of those products. Other products are available. And really, my concern, John, is not someone hacking me, right? I believe where my risk sits, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to those companies, is someone at Dropbox or Evernote or within Microsoft actually basically dropping the ball in the terms of the way some protocol is applied, right? And then that permitting access to my data. So the way I think about it when I use these kinds of products, I'm thinking what standard are they actually, saying that they will meet? What indemnities, if any, are they providing? Actually, those are quite limited. So I understand how to manage my own risk, and then I think about, well, how much data am I really going to put with them?
Okay. One of the latest NBR, there was actually an article on cyber defence, and it says cyber defence starts at a company's reception.
Yeah, I read that.
And earlier you just said that the risk really starts within the office.
Absolutely.
So what are your comments about that article from the NBR?
Well, that's a fascinating piece, actually, and we can thank Nathan Smith of NBR for that. The idea is that when it comes to hacking and so on, reality is far removed from what you see in the movie. So I don't know if you've seen the film Swordfish, but it's about a hacker who falls in with a criminal gang. And when he's doing his thing, streams of numbers are coming up the monitor, and he's busy banging away at his keyboard in order to identify a password within 60 seconds, right? And in fact, it isn't really like that at all. Typically, that initial penetration occurs with a conversation with a real person. Soft, it's organic, and that's the way in. And the typical ruse that's kind of very familiar to a lot of people already is someone in a large organisation claiming to be in the IT department, saying, calling back into the IT department, saying, can you just give me the password for so-and-so, right? Or just some information that just gives them the thin end of the wedge. And also receptionists, which is what I think Nathan is getting at in the article, at least from the headline. Someone calling in and asking a question that's aimed basically at ascertaining something about the way the company runs its system. Now, I make a lot of calls around town in the context of my job. I'm on the phone a great deal. And I'm quite surprised about what you'll be told about what people are doing in their whereabouts and what you can actually stitch together. Of course, in my case, they're all good faith questions and queries, and to some extent people may know me from my reputation already, and I think with you being honest and truthful, that probably comes through. But then again, if I was some nefarious criminal or whatever, in that situation, I'm probably being given too much information. I think I'm not sure what conclusion Nathan lands on in this article, but it seems to me that part of a company's risk management will be having an agreed script, an agreed approach for receptionists to stick to, or whoever happens to answer the phone.
And I think you also made a comment that the biggest risk is within the business, because you might actually get an employee who wishes to sabotage the existing system.
Right.
And therefore can cause corruption or take away firewalls or whatever.
Absolutely, and I think that probably is... well, firstly, we start with the idea that a company should, within its risk management framework, if it's of a size that it has policies towards things, include IT, firstly, as a topic. Drilling into that, I personally believe that it's the internal risk that's the most serious one. Nowadays, we have the proliferation of these little USB devices that can take up to 15, 16 gig. I was just looking at the Office manual that gets sent around every month, where you can buy sellotape and whatever. They're being sold on a keyring for $8. Okay. Ideally, just being very granular here, an IT system would be set up to basically reject a USB stick being put into a computer. That can be done. Managing, and on a related topic, if USB sticks are being used, requiring staff to use at least a minimum level encryption, and then just generally regulating access appropriately. And again, I have a personal feeling that sometimes, and I think I can understand this as a lawyer, the IT person kind of becomes this wizard with the hidden knowledge, the magic that no one else understands. And the reason I mentioned being a lawyer is, at least to some extent, or to a lesser extent these days, I have these skills that took 5 years to learn, and supposedly ordinary people aren't allowed to know. Actually, that's rubbish. And it's also rubbish for the IT person as well. And I encourage all small to medium businesses and even large businesses not to regard the IT person as off limits, the person with all the magic secrets. It's a question of engaging in their knowledge, understanding the processes, understanding what they are doing, requiring them to explain. The last thing anyone should think, or indeed say these days, is I'm IT illiterate. I mean, frankly, it's just a ridiculous thing to say these days, and you would only say that if you want to be laughed at by people. And that's really just about engaging in your systems, making sure all of your antivirus software is up to date, making sure that proper protocols, firewalls are being maintained, and all the rest of it.
Okay, so do you think cybercrime is a real big issue for small businesses?
I think it is, and what I would, because of the potential, what I would encourage any business of any size or any magnitude to consider is the worst case scenario. And now our first working idea is that for a lot of businesses, not all businesses of course, but for a lot of businesses, IT is just part of the way business is done, whether using Xero accounting software, online services, the internet, web ordering, backing up your data, or whatever. And to think about, how would I react if there was just a major interruption to my IT through an external attack, through phishing or malware or whatever, or some internal meltdown for some reason. And certainly there's some research, international research, to suggest that there's kind of low-level, light, LITE hacking that goes on that people are basically unaware of, So I think it's probably something that people need to keep in mind. Having said that, I'm aware that in the insurance community, the products are being pushed fairly, I'm being polite here, fairly robustly.
Yeah.
I think it's very important for customers, brokers, and everyone else involved in the way these products are rolled out to really understand their own systems and precisely what kind of cover they're getting. So small businesses would certainly be well advised to turn their minds to it, ask their brokers about it if they haven't already, and sit down with the broker, make sure that intermediary fully understands the business.
Yeah.
And then it may be that existing products cover the risk quite nicely, thank you very much.
Yeah.
But there is now a standalone cyber kind of product available.
Yeah.
Different kinds of products offered by different insurers. I know it's something that you have looked at for your customers from time to time.
Yep.
So all in all, I think there probably is something that they should think about. If they haven't thought about it already, they should spend some time thinking about it, maybe have a discussion with their broker.
From some of the listeners' perspectives, they'd probably be thinking, why is John asking a lawyer about cybercrime? Because a lawyer, a barrister, doesn't really know anything about insurance or about risk. What would your comment be to that?
Well, I mean, I've been in a situation, in fact, where I have worked with companies that have faced hacking attacks. So it just so happens that my practice has included that kind of work. And I suppose as someone whose practice includes a certain amount of insurance work, I attempt to be aware of what products are available. And professionally speaking, I'm kind of on the lookout, more just for interest's sake, of a disputed cover case or dispute basically in the next couple of years where there's friction in the kind of cover that's being offered. That could potentially be a kind of breakdown or miscommunication in terms of what people believe they're getting and what they actually end up with when the proverbial hits the fan.
One of the questions that I give to a lot of my clients is when they go into an agreement with the supplier, I say to them, have you looked at their contracts? Have you looked at what level of indemnity they give in the event that they muck up on something? There are many IT consultants out there that supply services to businesses at all different levels. What would be your advice to many of those businesses? And the reason I ask this is because many businesses rely upon their IT consultant to hold their hand on all matters relating to the operation of their IT world and cyber risks, rather than referring through to their insurance broker and checking out. So what would your advice be to those business owners?
Oh, well, that's a really interesting point, John. I think the general topic there is risk management and how you manage your IT risk. And just to pick up on one point that you raised at the end, certainly I don't think it is that insurance can be used to manage all of your risk. It's one of the tools in your toolbox, or whatever expression you want to choose. You should at least turn your mind to whether standalone insurance is appropriate. It may or may not be. Turn your mind to whether existing products are appropriate. They may or may not be. You can discuss that with your broker if you're a customer. So that's one aspect. And kind of take the first part of your point now, it is a very modern phenomenon that that we've seen in the last 10 years or so, that organisations now place substantial reliance on an outside third party in the way that you just described. And it actually makes them uniquely vulnerable. So the first thing is just understanding that's occurred, but the framework for that in almost every case is contractual. There'll be a series of agreements between the customer and the provider. Generally, if it's like IT support services, that will be most likely provided on the IT supplier's terms and conditions. And I would encourage anyone just to sit down and really understand what those are. Most commonly, if I had an IT support business, I'd be limiting my liability just as far as I could. I suppose as the customer then, you need to really understand that, in a sense, if the proverbial does hit the fan and you suffer financial loss, where does that sit? most likely will not sit
Correct.
with the third-party
Yeah.
IT supplier if they've been properly advised and have cribbed together,
Yeah.
suitable terms and conditions. This is the kind of discussion you would want to have with your IT supplier at the outset. There may not be a lot of scope for negotiation, but at
Yeah.
least you understand it. Coming full circle then, to the extent to which the third-party supplier is not going to sort you out contractually, you want to think, can that risk be addressed or at least mitigated through the appropriate use of insurance?
Awesome. So if a customer comes to you, a small business operator or a medium-sized business, and they say, what advice would you give to us? What solutions would you be able to provide to us to actually mitigate, manage that cybercrime risk so that it's something that we can actually handle? What would you suggest to them?
So if they walk through the doors and just ask for general risk management
Yes.
advice, well, I think there would be 3 or so aspects there. There are probably more. Firstly would be to actually just in the real world understand your own systems. If you're not the kind of person who's really engaged with the information framework to your business, if there is one, really sit down and actually apply yourself to it. You hear the term encryption bandied about, kind of figure out actually what that really means and understand where your risks lie. Are there people within your organisation upon whom you place a lot of reliance and you kind of fob yourself off in effect by saying this is not something I understand? Engage and learn. My mother is 74. She picked up basically a computer for the first time for about 5 years ago.
Yay.
Now she's lecturing me on whether it should be USB or Firewire. Anyone can learn anything, anytime, if you're basically compass mentis and other things equal.
Yep.
That'll be the first aspect, which is just, really getting stuck in. The second aspect, I'd say, would just be understanding the contractual framework with your suppliers. To what extent are they addressing these risks? And conversely, where is that risk actually just left with you? Which kind of dovetails into the next one, which is how can these risks potentially be managed through your existing insurance arrangements, new arrangements through existing traditional products, or potentially also a cyber insurance type product. And I'm not sitting here, John, saying that this is something people necessarily need to know. I'm just saying that I'm aware this product is out there, and there will be situations where broker says you don't need that, or maybe they will recommend it, and at least you'll have the discussion. From a broker's point of view, you'll be learning the customer system too.
So, which brings us on to another subject, because there's also now a connection between cybercrime and D&O.
Right.
And similarly, there's a connection with health and safety and D&O.
Sure.
So, for your advice to a business owner, and he just focuses on that issue of cybercrime, what sort of little nuggets would you give to that business owner in saying, well, wait a second, that's one element, but you've actually got a connection with your D&O. So primarily you've got to protect your position as a director.
Right. Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, John, which is people should be turning their mind to that kind of risk. What we're talking about there is a director of a company facing some kind of personal claim against him or her in his capacity as a director. Certainly it's a risk that needs to be managed. Generally out in the real world, claims against directors are, thankfully for directors, fairly rare. What you're really looking at is kind of, again, in the real world, just a claim by an actionable claim by shareholders that you've done something to erode value in a way that amounts to a legal claim, or in some even more limited circumstances, claims by creditors. That kind of claim can exist, probably more common in the United States, where there are various laws around how you manage notification of an IT breach and the potential for there to be tens of millions of customers all kind of pointing the finger at you as an individual. But here, you would potentially be having a discussion with the broker about appropriate directors and officers, or D&O, insurance coverage. I think it's a discussion that should happen. For many, for example, small and medium businesses, they might have that discussion and discover that, all things considered, maybe they don't need to part with that money to pay the premium. When you sit down and really study, actually, where is the claim against a director specifically, where's that going to come from? But certainly that's a discussion that needs to be had. And for kind of medium businesses upwards, typically you'd see the full suite of products, insurance products that I would expect to see included D&O.
Okay, so and one of the other issues out there, and we mentioned it earlier, we talked about sabotage from within, and I went to the seminar run by the Employers and Manufacturers Association not so long ago, and it was all about ownership of intellectual property.
Oh, right.
And one of the things that dawned on me was that there wouldn't be this necessity to protect intellectual property if the employees were taking true ownership and were truly part of the organisation. That threat would be gone. So, but in IT, there's an awful lot of intellectual property, and in business there's an awful lot of intellectual property held within the IT system. So would I be right in saying that your connection, that maybe there's another door here for the threat of cybercrime, and that fundamentally comes from the protection of intellectual property, but reducing that risk by looking after the employees and taking the employees as having ownership within that business. What's your perception of that from a legal perspective?
I'm intrigued to hear that, John, because that's quite a thoughtful perspective on things. To start with, there is certainly what I'd call an IP risk linked to kind of what we call cyber risk, cyber crime. And if a company basically has all of its value locked up in IP data, be that confidential information or films or kind of books or whatever, and that's suddenly all released, that's quite devastating for them. What you really, I think what you're getting at there is kind of employee engagement, I think, just making sure that they feel responsible for managing that risk. It's kind of vertical sharing of risk, which is partly cultural. There'll be one thought about that for what it's worth. My other thought would be that when it comes to looking at cyber risk insurance coverage, if you have an IP exposure there, is that in the sense that you will suffer loss if there's an attack in relation to your IP, is that something that the insurance will actually cater for? I don't think I really know the products well enough yet to fully appreciate whether they cover that or are intended to cover that. If the product that's put in front of you doesn't, then you could be looking at an extension of some kind, I suppose. Or if it doesn't cater for it, then that's just something you'll need to understand, in which case you'll just be managing that risk yourself just through the culture of the organisation or otherwise.
Okay, so what would your final solution be to a company in looking at mitigating the cybercrime risk?
Well, I think it's really a matter of, it's just a matter of personal opinion, John, to be honest. I've used the expression a few times now, really engaging with your own kit, the hardware, the software, your network connection, whatever software you rely on to manage potential hacking and so on. Really learning that as best you can. If you're a one-man band, or one-person band, I should say, if you're in a larger organisation where someone's responsible for that, really attempt to engage with them and understand how things work. There's more granular stuff, like, I mean, if these USB sticks are frankly, pernicious, there's so much scope for, things to be downloaded onto those things, and just the value of the business just to walk through the door. If I had a business with many employees, or if I actually had a law firm, for example, I just worked for myself and had 20 people, I would forbid those things, basically. Or I would, you'd have to turn them in at the door or something. And there's other common sense stuff, John, like if a business is at a stage where you're thinking about having an insurance program, then you're thinking about how that risk is appropriately managed.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind the word that's coming from upstairs from reinsurers who kind of set kind of global policy,
Yeah.
and the tone of thinking about these kinds of things is insurance can only be ever part of the solution. And current products these days are geared somewhat, in my opinion, towards what I call loss mitigation, or just managing scenarios as they unfold, rather than kind of true indemnity for all of the financial consequences that might follow through. That's just a matter of opinion. Many products are available. In which case, if insurance is just part of the solution,
Yeah.
then you're thinking about how to appropriately manage your risk
Yeah.
contractually, in terms of your practices, in terms of how you set the culture of your organisation.
Okay, that's cool.
Lovely.
Steve, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
So really what it's about is making certain that you manage your risk, you understand your IT systems, and you get everything squared away, rather than just relying upon your indemnity policy to actually provide financial support to you. So Steve, thank you for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, John. See you next time.
Thank you.